They said a black man couldn't do it. They said his hands weren't steady enough, his mind not sharp enough, his place not worthy enough to touch the machinery that would decide the fate of the free world. But on a cold morning in 1943, inside a sprawling factory in Detroit where the roar of industrial might drown out the whispers of hatred, one man stood before a blueprint that would change everything. His name was David Baker, and the machines he was about to build wouldn't just help win the war, they would prove that genius has no color, that brilliance bows to no segregation, and that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with guns, but with wrenches, slide rules, and an unbreakable will to prove the world wrong. The story begins not in the smoke and fire of European battlefields, but in the suffocating heat of Birmingham, Alabama, where David Baker first learned that the color of his skin would be both his greatest obstacle and his most powerful motivation. Born in 1915 to a sharecropper father and a schoolteacher mother who insisted education was the only weapon that couldn't be taken away, David showed an early fascination with how things worked. While other children played in the red clay dirt, he dismantled pocket watches, rebuilt broken radios, sketched elaborate mechanical contraptions in notebooks his mother bought with money she didn't have. His father would shake his head, not in disappointment, but in fear, because in the deep south of the 1920s, a black boy with big dreams was a dangerous thing. Dreams got you noticed, and being noticed got you hurt. But David's mother refused to let the world crush her son's spirit. She scrubbed floors in white homes during the day and taught David mathematics by candlelight at night, her fingers tracing equations across borrowed textbooks while outside, the world reminded them daily of their supposed inferiority. Separate water fountains, separate schools, separate futures. The message was clear and cruel: know your place, stay in your lane, and never, ever dream of touching the machinery that builds empires. Yet every time David passed the local machine shop where white men shaped metal into marvels, he felt something stir inside him, not resentment, though that came later, but a burning question that wouldn't let him sleep. Why not me? The answer came in 1933 when David, against astronomical odds, earned a scholarship to study mechanical engineering at Tuskegee Institute, one of the few places in America where a black student could pursue such an education. At Tuskegee, surrounded by other young black men and women who refused to accept the limitations the world imposed, David flourished. He stayed up until dawn perfecting calculations, his hands stained with ink and grease, his mind racing through problems of torque and tension, stress and strain. His professors saw in him something rare, not just intelligence, but an intuitive understanding of machinery, as if he could hear the language of metal and speak it fluently. By the time he graduated in 1937 with top honors, David Baker was arguably one of the most talented young engineers in America. But in America, that talent meant nothing if you were black. He applied to every major engineering firm in the country: Ford, General Motors, General Electric, Westinghouse. The rejection letters came like clockwork, each one a knife wrapped in polite language. Some didn't bother with politeness. One letter simply stated, "We do not employ colored engineers." Another suggested he might be better suited for janitorial work. David kept every rejection letter, stacking them in a box beneath his bed, and every night he looked at that box and made himself a promise. Someday, somehow, he would build something so important, so undeniable, that they would have to acknowledge him. He didn't know that the opportunity would come wrapped in the most devastating war humanity had ever seen. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor burns. America, thrust into global conflict, suddenly faces an existential crisis. It needs machines. Thousands upon thousands of machines, and it needs them fast. Tanks, planes, ships, artillery. The industrial heartland of America, Detroit in particular, transforms overnight into what President Roosevelt calls the arsenal of democracy. Single quotes factories that once made automobiles now make bombers. Assembly lines that produced family sedans now produce Sherman tanks. And in this desperate scramble to arm a nation, something unprecedented happens. The color line begins to blur. Not because America suddenly becomes enlightened, but because it has no choice. The war demands more workers than white America can supply. And so, reluctantly, grudgingly, the factories open their doors to black workers. Not with welcome, but with necessity. David Baker arrives at the Willow Run bomber plant in Michigan in January 1943, one of thousands of black Americans migrating north for war work. And the plant is a marvel, the largest factory under one roof in the world, nearly a mile long, designed to mass-produce B-24 Liberator bombers at a rate that seems impossible. One bomber every hour. It's an assembly line on a scale never before attempted, and it's chaos. Production goals aren't being met. Bottlenecks clog the line. Machinery breaks down faster than it can be repaired. The pressure is immense because across the Atlantic, American boys are dying. And they're dying in part because they don't have enough air support. Every day of delay at Willow Run means more Gold Star mothers, more telegrams that begin with, "We regret to inform you." David is hired not as an engineer, they won't give him that title, but as a technical assistant, which really means he's expected to carry tools for white engineers and keep his mouth shut. He's assigned to the machine shop, a massive space filled with lathes. milling machines, drill presses, the heartbeat of the factory where precision parts are manufactured. On his first day, he walks through clouds of metallic dust, past machines tended by men who glance at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. A white foreman, a man named Sullivan with a beer gut and a cigarette perpetually dangling from his lips, looks David up and down and says, "You can read blueprints, boy?" David, swallowing his anger at that word, at the condescension dripping from it, simply nods. Sullivan tosses him a blueprint for a hydraulic actuator component, a complex part with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. "File this away," Sullivan says, dismissing him. But David doesn't file it away. He studies it, and within 10 minutes he spots a design flaw that will cause the component to fail under stress. He hesitates. This is his first day. He's been hired to carry tools, not to question the work of white engineers with decades of experience. But he remembers his mother's words from childhood. If you know something is right, speak it. The world may punish you for speaking, but it will definitely punish you for staying silent. So David approaches Sullivan, blueprint in hand, and politely, carefully explains the problem. Sullivan's face reddens. The other men in the shop go quiet, watching this moment that could end very badly. "You think you know better than the engineers who designed this." Sullivan's voice is dangerous. David meets his eyes and says simply, "I think the math doesn't lie. Sir, it's a gamble that could get him fired on the spot. Blacklisted from war work, sent back to a South that has nothing for him." But Sullivan, to his credit, actually looks at the blueprint, follows David's calculations, and after a long, tense silence, nods slowly. "Test it," he says. The component is manufactured both ways, the original design and David's modification. Under stress testing, the original design fails exactly as David predicted, shattering at 2/3 the required pressure. His version holds. That moment, witnessed by a dozen skeptical white workers, changes something. Not everything. David still eats lunch at the colored table in the cafeteria, still uses the segregated bathroom, still endures the casual racism that permeates every interaction. But in that machine shop, he's earned something more valuable than respect. He's earned proof. And in the world of engineering, proof is currency. Word spreads. Within weeks, David finds himself quietly consulted on problems that have stumped the official engineering staff. A bearing assembly that keeps seizing up, a rivet pattern that's causing metal fatigue, a cooling system that's inadequate for the engine specifications. He works on these problems at night after his official shift ends, hunched over borrowed blueprints in the colored section of the dormitory, running calculations by lamplight, sketching solutions on whatever paper he can find. His recommendations are implemented without his name. Attached white engineers present them as their own discoveries because a black man's name on an engineering document is still unthinkable, but David doesn't care about credit. Not yet. He cares about the work, about proving every day that his mind is as sharp as any tool in that shop. Then comes March 1943, and a crisis that will define his legacy. The B-24 Liberator has a critical problem. The landing gear system is failing at an alarming rate. Bombers are crash landing, pilots are dying, and the entire production line might have to stop until the issue is resolved. The landing gear mechanism is incredibly complex. It has to be strong enough to absorb the impact of a 65,000-pound aircraft touching down at high speed, yet light enough not to compromise the bomber's performance, and reliable enough to function after the aircraft has been shot full of holes by German fighters. The current design, developed by some of the best aeronautical engineers in America, is failing in field conditions. Planes are bellying onto runways, gear collapsing on landing, crews barely escaping before their bombers burst into flames. The pressure on Willow Run becomes suffocating. Military brass arrive from Washington, grim-faced men in uniforms heavy with medals demanding answers. Production slows to a crawl as engineers scramble for solutions. Tests are conducted. Modifications are attempted. Nothing works. David watches from his position at the margins, this black man still officially just a technical assistant, and he sees what the white engineers don't see because they're too close to their own assumptions. The problem isn't the gear mechanism itself, it's the hydraulic system that deploys it. Under combat stress with battle damage and temperature extremes, the hydraulic fluid is degrading, losing pressure at the critical moment of deployment. The mechanism is fine. The delivery system is flawed. He spends 3 sleepless nights running calculations, testing his theory against every variable he can imagine. Temperature ranges from -40 degrees at altitude to 120 degrees on sun-baked Pacific runways. Pressure variations from sea level to 25,000 feet. The effects of vibration, G-forces, battle damage. He redesigns the hydraulic system from scratch, incorporating redundancies, adding a pressure accumulator, changing the routing to protect lines from enemy fire, even suggesting a different hydraulic fluid with better thermal properties. It's audacious. It's a complete reimagining of a system designed by men with pedigrees from MIT and Caltech. And when David finally, nervously, brings his calculations to Sullivan, he fully expects to be laughed out of the shop. Sullivan doesn't laugh. He stares at the pages of calculations, the detailed schematics, the test data David has compiled on his own time with borrowed equipment. Then he does something David never expects. He picks up the phone and calls the chief engineer. Within an hour, David is standing in a conference room he was never supposed to enter, surrounded by white men in suits and uniforms. all of them looking at this black technical assistant with expressions ranging from skepticism to open hostility. One colonel actually asks, "Who did these calculations for you, boy?" The assumption that David couldn't possibly have done this work himself hangs in the air like poison gas. But the chief engineer, a pragmatic man named Henderson who cares more about solving problems than maintaining racial etiquette, cuts through the tension. "Can you defend this work?" he asks David. "Can you explain every decision, every calculation?" David can. For 2 hours, he walks them through his redesign, answering every technical question, defending every choice, demonstrating a mastery of hydraulic systems that makes it impossible to deny his competence. The men in that room don't want to believe him. Everything in their world tells them that a black man shouldn't be capable of this level of engineering sophistication. But the mathematics doesn't care about their prejudices. The stress calculations don't respect segregation. The fluid dynamics work the same regardless of who discovered them. And so, reluctantly, almost resentfully, they agree to test his design. 3 weeks later, a B-24 modified with David Baker's hydraulic system completes its test flight. The landing gear deploys flawlessly. Over the next month, under conditions designed to replicate combat stress, the system works perfectly, not once does it fail. The decision is made. Willow Run will implement the Baker hydraulic system on all B-24 Liberators moving forward. Bombers already in service will be retrofitted with the modification. It's a massive undertaking, but it's necessary because David's design doesn't just work, it saves lives. Over the remaining years of the war, his hydraulic system will prevent countless landing gear failures. Will bring home crews who otherwise would have died in fiery crashes. Will keep bombers operational when they should have been grounded. But here's the bitter truth. David Baker's name appears nowhere in the official record. The design is credited to the Willow Run Engineering Department, a faceless institutional entity. White engineers sign their names to the modification documents. When military officials come to inspect the improvement, they congratulate Henderson and his team, never knowing that the brilliant redesign came from a black man they wouldn't have allowed through the front door a year earlier. David watches this happen, watches his work attributed to others, and feels the familiar burn of injustice. But he also understands something that sustains him. The work itself is what matters, somewhere over Germany. A B-24 riddled with flak damage will make it home because its landing gear deploys when it should. The crew will kiss the ground, thank God for their survival, never knowing that their lives were saved by a black engineer from Birmingham who the world tried to tell he wasn't good enough. The work doesn't stop with the landing gear. Once David proves himself, once it becomes undeniable that he possesses engineering talent that the factory desperately needs, he becomes unofficially essential. The color line still exists, he still can't eat in the main cafeteria, still can't use certain facilities, still endures the daily humiliations of segregation, but in the machine shop, a strange respect develops. White workers who would never socialize with him outside the factory start coming to him with problems. A lathe operator struggling with a complex part asks David to check his setup. A welder encountering unusual metal fatigue requests his analysis. Reluctantly, David is integrated into the actual engineering work. Though his job title and pay never reflect his contributions, he improves the engine mount assembly, reducing vibration that was causing premature wear. He redesigns the bomb bay door mechanism, making it more reliable under combat conditions. He develops a modification to the oxygen system that prevents freeze-ups at high altitude. Each innovation is small in isolation, but together they make the B-24 Liberator a better, safer, more effective weapon of war. And every improvement carries the same invisible signature. The mind of a black man who was supposed to be intellectually inferior, who was told his entire life that he couldn't think at this level, who proved through sheer brilliance that racism is a lie built on fear. The other black workers at Willow Run hear stories about David, whispered in the colored dormitories shared over segregated lunch tables. He becomes a symbol of what's possible, proof that the limitations imposed on black Americans are social constructions, not natural facts. Young black men in the machine shop watch how David works, how he commands respect through competence, how he navigates the dangerous space between asserting his worth and staying safe in a racist world. It's an exhausting tightrope walk, demanding constant calculation of when to speak and when to stay silent, when to push back against injustice and when to swallow pride for survival. But David walks it with a dignity that inspires everyone who sees him. Then comes D-Day, June 6, 1944, and the massive invasion of Normandy. The B-24 Liberators that David helped perfect fly countless missions over France, providing air support for the troops storming the beaches, bombing German positions, disrupting enemy supply lines. In the days and weeks following the invasion, as Allied forces push deeper into Europe, these bombers become crucial to the war effort. And though history will remember the generals and the infantry, the pilots and the bombardiers, no one will remember the black engineer in Detroit whose hydraulic system kept those planes flying, whose engine modifications gave them a few extra miles of range, whose countless small improvements added up to save lives in successful missions. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces close in on Berlin and victory becomes inevitable, David Baker has spent over 2 years at Willow Run. He's worked 70-hour weeks, sacrificed sleep and health, endured racism that should have broken him, and produced engineering work that would have made him famous if he'd been born white. The factory has built over 8,600 B-24 Liberators, each one carrying pieces of David's genius into battle. The war in Europe ends in May, victory over Japan follows in August. And suddenly the industrial machinery that defined David's life for years begins to slow down. The factory starts laying off workers. The need for bombers evaporates overnight. And the black workers who were so desperately needed during the crisis are the first ones shown the door. David receives his termination notice in September 1945, along with thousands of other black workers who powered the arsenal of democracy but are no longer needed. Now that democracy has been saved, the notice thanks him for his service as a technical assistant and provides 2 weeks severance. There's no mention of his engineering contributions, no acknowledgement of the innovations that saved countless lives, no offer to retain him in the post-war era when factories will go back to making cars. Sullivan, the foreman who initially doubted David but grew to respect him, finds him in the machine shop on his last day. The old man looks uncomfortable, doesn't quite meet David's eyes, and says gruffly, "You're the best engineer I ever worked with, Baker. I'm sorry it has to end this way. It's not enough it doesn't undo the injustice. Doesn't provide David with the career he earned, but it's something." An acknowledgement, however private, that David Baker was never just a technical assistant. He was the man who helped beat Hitler with mathematics and metal, with hydraulics and hope. After the war, David tries to leverage his Willow Run experience into an engineering career. He applies to firms in Detroit, in Chicago, in New York, carefully crafting his resume to highlight his contributions while navigating the impossible task of claiming credit for work that was officially attributed to others. He can't exactly write redesigned hydraulic system for B-24 Liberator when there's no official record of his involvement. The engineering firms look at his resume, see his degree from Tuskegee, note his race, and the rejections come just like they did in 1937. The war changed many things, but it didn't change America's fundamental unwillingness to see black geniuses equal to white mediocrity. He eventually finds work as a high school mathematics and physics teacher in Detroit's black neighborhood, educating the next generation, trying to pass on not just knowledge but the belief that they can achieve anything despite a world designed to stop them. It's honorable work, important work, but David knows he's capable of so much more. At night, he sits in his small apartment surrounded by engineering textbooks and drafting tools he rarely uses, and wonders what he could have built if America had let him. How many innovations died because a talented black engineer was confined to a classroom instead of a laboratory? How much potential was wasted because racism valued skin color over capability? Decades pass. The story of Willow Run becomes legend. The tale of American industrial might defeating fascism through sheer productive capacity. Books are written, documentaries are made. Museums preserve B-24 Liberators as symbols of the greatest generation's triumph. The engineers who designed these planes are celebrated, their names recorded in history. But David Baker's name appears nowhere. His contributions exist only in fading memories and the recollections of a few black workers who knew him. In the private knowledge of men like Sullivan, who saw his genius firsthand but never fought to ensure he received recognition. David Baker dies in 1983 at age 68, having never received public acknowledgement for his wartime contributions. His obituary in the local Detroit newspaper identifies him as a retired teacher and community leader. It doesn't mention Willow Run, doesn't mention hydraulic systems or bomber engineering, doesn't hint at the fact that this quiet, dignified man helped win the most important war in human history. His story, like the stories of thousands of black Americans who contributed to victory but were erased from the narrative, seems destined to disappear completely, another casualty of America's selective memory. But here's what racism couldn't destroy: the work itself. Every B-24 Liberator that made it home safely with David's hydraulic system. Every crew member who survived a landing that should have been fatal because a black engineer from Birmingham understood fluid dynamics better than the white men with famous names and prestigious degrees. Every bomb that reached its target because David's engine modifications gave the plane just enough extra performance. The machines he built didn't care about the color of their creator's skin. They just worked reliably, effectively, saving lives and winning battles. And in the end, isn't that the ultimate vindication? Not the recognition that never came, not the career that was stolen, not the credit that was denied, but the undeniable fact that when America needed genius, it found it in a place it claimed genius couldn't exist, and a man it said couldn't possibly possess the intelligence to shape history. David Baker built machines that beat Hitler, and he did it while a nation that needed him refused to see him. His story finally being told now, decades too late to benefit him but not too late to honor him, is more than the tale of one brilliant engineer denied his due. It's the story of how many David Bakers existed, how many black Americans possessed talents that could have changed the world but were never given the chance, how much human potential America squandered in service of maintaining racial hierarchy. For every David Baker we discover, how many remain invisible, their contributions erased, their genius unrecognized. The B-24 Liberator helped win World War II, but it won despite America's racism, not because America overcame it. And the men and women who built those planes, who designed their systems, who solved the engineering problems that kept them flying, many of them were black Americans whose names we'll never know. whose brilliance was stolen by a society that couldn't admit they possessed it. David Baker deserved better. He deserved to sign his name to his designs, to be celebrated as the engineering genius he was, to build a career worthy of his talents, to see his children grow up knowing their father helped save the world. He deserved to live in an America that judged him by his capabilities rather than his color. He didn't get that America, not in his lifetime, but the machines he built remained testament to what was possible when talent met necessity, when one man refused to let racism define his worth, when genius proved stronger than prejudice, if only for the brief moment it took to solve an impossible problem and save countless lives. If this story moved you, please take a second to like this video. It truly helps us keep these untold stories alive. David Baker's name may not appear in the history books you learn from, but his legacy lives in every recovered story of Black excellence that refused to be silenced. Share your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you know of other forgotten heroes whose contributions deserve recognition. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel to discover more real stories of Black Americans whose courage, brilliance, and determination changed the course of history, even when history tried to forget them. These stories matter. These lives mattered. And the truth, no matter how long delayed, deserves to be told.